Okay, so now we've been asked to supply internet access to CE1 on both router 3 and router 4. Now router 3 and router 4 now have a couple of differences, because on router 4 we're using VRF import and VRF export to get into and out of the VPN, and on router 3 we're just using VRF target. So what that means is on router 3 anything that's in the table sort of goes into that VPN, so we just have to be a little bit careful. Secondly, on router 3 we haven't typed VRF table label yet, and we'll see the impact of that over on router 8, and that's really quite significant. This VRF table label really is required when you have these next tables in your routes. Okay, so let's start at the top and let's see what we're doing. So we need to get the CE1 into the internet so the internet can route towards it, and we need to get some sort of internet route across into the VRF. So we need to cross that VRF INET 0 boundary twice. So let's start at the top. So set routing options rib group, C1 VPN INET, import rib, C1 INET to INET. So the goal here is that we are going to take all of our C1 INET routes and put them in the INET. And this will allow the internet to then route into the C1. Okay, so let's see where we're going to apply this. Well, of course, we're going to apply it to the OSPF. So inside the routing instance C1, product OSPF, rib groups, INET, C1 VPN INET. And at this point, all of the CPN routes go into the INET. However, they're in the INET, but they're not being exported out to the internet. So now, in the white here, we have that export, and it's a true export. Set protocol BGP group, IBGP export, C1 INET routes. So this is going out into the main internet connection. This is where the internet's located. Now to do that, we're going to build an aggregate route representing C1 because it's cleaner. And then set policy options, policy statements, C1 INET routes, term 1 from protocol aggregate, from the route filter, accept. So at this point, we've gone one of our directions. The C1 routes are in the INET, it's represented with an aggregate, there's a policy option policy statement, we've grabbed it and we've exported it on the real IBGP. And we need to do that on both router 3 and on router 4. Okay, so let's go the other direction. So the other direction, the C1 has to actually be able to get to the INET. So set routing instance C1, routing options, static route, 00, next table, INET 0. And for the next table INET 0, we really do need the VRF table label. Okay, so what we have here is a static route pointing out of the VRF into literally a different table, and this table is INET 0. However, this static route will now need advertising to C1 because it's all very well to have that on router 3, but a remote site won't be able to get to it. So set policy options policy statement, C1 default to OSPF, from protocol static, route filter not exact, accept, and we're going to export that out the OSPF inside the routing instance. And that will take that route across to R8 and of course also to R4. Now, when it reaches R8, this next table is not one of the interfaces inside C1, and therefore we must have VRF table label on router 3. Okay, so now let's come down to router 4. It's exactly the same. We need to take the routes from C1 INET and put them in INET 0. However, when we come to look, we see there's a rib group already on it. And the rib group is from the previous exercise, C1 C2 VPN. It was moving C1 INET to C2 spoke. So what we're going to do, we're going to delete it. It's easier to put it back in again. And we'll put that back in again as C1 INET, C2 spoke, and then the INET 0. So at this point, do bear in mind that once we have the C1 routes in INET 0, we then need all of this to export them out of the C1. So this part here then applies on router 4. We've done it on router 3. We need to do it on router 4. It's the same thing. the routes are in the INET 0. We're going to represent them with the aggregate route, and we're going to push them out the true IBGP. Okay, so there's only one other major difference between router 3 and router 4, and that is that router 4 is using VRF import and VRF export, whereas router 3, we haven't had to do anything about getting the routes across the VPN because it's just going to be taking them naturally. Now, of course, on router 4, that's not going to take place. So yes, we still need the set routing instance, C1 routing options, static route, 00, next table, still need that. We still need this policy here to push it into the OSPF, but then we also need to push all that into the VRF export. Now, the VRF export, C1 VPN export is the one that we're going to be using, and we're going to be editing term 3. Now, what did term 1 and term 2 say? Well, I've put them up here for us to remember. So set policy options, policy statement, C1 VPN export. Term 1 is from protocol direct. If you remember these precise interfaces, so that the other directs that have come in from the pink hub and spoke don't also get exported out. And we're setting the community to C1 and accepting it. Then we're taking the OSPF and accepting it. Of course, the OSPF will have this route involved. And then, of course, we now have the new edited term 3 because we're going to delete the original, which was just a reject statement, edit the term 3 from protocol static, route filter 00, then community set C1, accept, and then reject. And what that's going to do is make sure that we take this route across to the VPN.